Well, greetings, Commanders. Today we are in one of my favourite all-time ships, the ASP Explorer. The first ship I ever took all the way to Sagittarius A and back, and certainly one I've covered more light years in than probably any other ship. So let's get straight into it. Those of you who have played in multiplayer will be familiar with this view. It is in fact the view from the co-pilot's chair. Now the dashboard is something that's very different in the Lakon Spaceways, or whatever they're called, Lakon ships. I appreciate I'm facing away from the camera here, so I'll spin around and I'll give you an idea of the scale of the actual dash. So if you look at it here, it sort of goes around like this and down to about there. So that is about how wide the entire thing is. The center screen is only about yay big. The seat itself is the standard seat that you see in all non-Imperial ships, and it looks extremely uncomfortable as always, with no lumbar support and extremely thin padding. And as previous ships, it's mounted about 6 feet off the ground. But that's not why we're here. We need to look at this area because this is the seldom viewed part of the ASP Explorer, because often you're up there. So to begin with, the view out the front, we are probably, I want to say we're just slightly less than a second story in terms of height. So it's actually not as high as some of the other ships, notwithstanding that there is a whole another level above us. Now I've actually centered myself in this space so I can actually walk around the entirety of this lower area within the one space without having to recenter, hence why my hands are free. And you will see that it's still a very large space, of course, because everything's really big. So let's start over here with these panels. So this one says Lakon Systems, Core Schematics Overview, Signature 1, Signature 2, Core 1, Core 2, Active Core Normals, System Diagnostics Online, System Scan Pending, and a bunch of stuff. Now it's actually pretty low res kind of screen, and ironically, my glitching system, ironically it looks a bit CRT-esque, as you can see when I get to the sides of it. Yeah, everything else is a flat screen. This thing is like an old CRT, which is a bit bizarre. This one down here is an absolute carbon copy of that top screen, but that one is about the size of a mobile phone, and a small one at that. This over here just says System Diagnose Online, System Scan Pending, with one switch and a twist dial maybe, which is very low polygon, and some handles on the side which are definitely human hand sized, but the panel doesn't actually look like it moves in any way. No, it's not really hinged on the wall or anything like that, so for some reason there is a handle. Down here there is a maintenance hatch, 71D8 maybe, maintenance only, ow, and Lakon Systems and a bunch of stuff that's too low res for me to see, but it's also not really centered onto, you can see where those buttons are supposed to be based on the background texture, and it's not really centered on them correctly. Down here we have some vents. The floor is made out of your good old-fashioned standard shiny plastic, maybe, yeah, thereabouts. And the seat is just mounted in one of those non-movable tubs, I guess, for want of a better word. There's a bit of a maintenance hatch down here. It's about that size. So moving around the back, we have one grab handle here, the correct size, shape and alignment for a human hand. A couple of small access panels here in the wall, about a foot wide each roughly. Some air venting down the back, and otherwise this part of the cabin is actually fairly plain. And here it just says access to system RCS4, RCS8. Not sure what those mean. And then we have the rear door, which we'll be going through in just a minute. And if I walk all the way to the other side, so here on the ladder it says do not access while running. But there is obviously an openable panel there. And the ladder, which is the correct scale to be able to climb. These handles are fairly wide. They'd be hard to grip, maybe as a monkey grip from the other side you could do it, and then you could easily climb up the ladder onto the second level where the commander is, who we'll say hi to in a second. Here is another repeat of that system panel. Slightly misaligned again to the background texture, but a little bit better. You can have a read for yourself, pause it if you want to, see if you can make out what those things actually say. But it's fairly low res. Over here we have very clearly a fire extinguisher labeled as such, and there doesn't seem to be any nozzle for it, which is always fun. And that's kind of it for down here. Another access panel and another repeat of that low res misaligned panel display. And that's it. I mean, down here it's actually pretty plain, to be honest, which I suppose is okay for a co-pilot's chair. Now, I'm going to stick my head through this door. Let's have a look quickly what it says. Closed while in flight mode, maybe in very low res. And a regular size sort of keypad, pretty fat buttons, and O and C, presumably open and close, with an access panel down here. And just before I step through it, I've been through it already, so I know it's on the other side, so I just want to prep you. The door itself is actually really huge, so if I can pretty much just about reach the edges if I fully span out my arms. And in terms of height, it's probably 7 feet tall. But you'll see in a second when you walk through, not much of a walkway. So through here are two of the small hard points just sitting right next to you inside the door. So let me recenter once and then I'll show you a bit more about this area. Alright, so I'm back in here and I would be basically now touching the two small hard points. So there is not a huge amount of space here between these two hard points, but certainly large enough for you to walk down as a corridor. And you can see that the hard points are immediately behind the door, because as I go through the door and back, you can see the hard point starts right where the door finishes. So that's an interesting spot for it to actually be. Now, given that we're so close, I'm going to stick my head into the hard point and we'll see if there's any mechanical stuff in here. So you can see a few low-res bits and bobs, and there is the ratchet system that the hard point would actually come down on as it deploys down through the ground and out the front that way. And pretty much the same texture as we find on the floor in most of the ships for the actual bottom, in this case top, of the hard point itself, which is quite interesting. And the other one obviously is identical in terms of the workings. There is in fact the wheel that should run down the teeth here, but it's not a toothed wheel, because why would you bother rendering that? There'd be no point. They obviously didn't foresee me shoving my head through this thing. And here's what the view would look like if you were coming down this corridor and into the co-pilot seat. Obviously be walking through here, and if you decided to go up to the captain's area, the commander's area, you would walk up here and then climb up the ladder, which we'll do now. Now I've recentered myself back in the commander's chair over here because I want to show you something that I've just noticed. The planetary display, obviously we're on a planet here, the display for the G's and your speed and descent is actually way far outside your ship. So if I walk through the cockpit, you can see it's still floating all the way over there, and there's no way that I can even venture to get anywhere near it, which is quite amusing. And in terms of size, it's like a good 5 by 5 meters as it's floating out in front of the ship. So it's actually quite amusing. Hello, Commander Headless. And from the front here, you can sort of see the orientation between where the commander's chair is and where the co-pilot sits, and the very severe angle that the front of the canopy takes down towards the co-pilot's chair. Let's step outside of Commander Headless over here. And as per normal, the chair is mounted such that the head of Commander Headless, moving around there, which is always weird, is about my height off the ground. As a person who's 6 feet tall, it's roughly where my head would be if I was standing on the ground. So that gives you a sense of height in terms of where you sit in the commander chair. And the feet are actually sort of my mid-thigh level. So you're really high up off the deck, which is probably something that isn't super clear in Pancake. Now the front heads-up display in this is a carbon copy of the one downstairs, but remember when I showed you it was about this big? Well, this one starts here and it ends here. So it is absolutely giant. If it was flat, you could lie down on it and you'd have no issues at all. Unlike most of the other ships where the projector here is round, this one is square. And I'll give you a sense of scale of this one. So it would be about yay by yay. So I'm thinking a 36-inch display in terms of width and slightly wider in terms of height. So a pretty gigantic thing, but it's also just sort of like a weird mesh sort of material. So that doesn't seem like a projector, but there you go. Over here next to it we have just some greebling and panels, and nothing very interesting about that at all. Some vents for air conditioning with no interior to speak of, and not really interior for the actual dash itself. And from underneath it's very plain. And here you can see sort of the struts that are holding the display panel up and how they go in under the floor down to where the co-pilot sits. So it's quite amusing because in both views you see this panel and you think, oh yeah, it must be about the same size, but this one is absolutely gigantic. In terms of the displays for the holographic ship, it's again about the size of a dinner plate, so that seems to be standard across the ships. And this ball here for the planet is about that big, so the size of maybe a handball, definitely not as big as a basketball. So now to the sides of the ship, and we'll sort of start over here next to the panel. There's this weird blue sort of untextured light maybe inside the panel here, and a grab handle over there, which as some of you have pointed out is for 0G operations, but it is quite far over the front of that canopy, so I'm not sure what you'd be doing grabbing that handle, but there you go. And one of the main lights that you can see from the front here is just above that handle, and you can see it's kind of a recessed LED fluorescent kind of thing with again a bit of a outward bulge. Yes, I did just say bulge. Down here we have a ship nameplate that says Lakon ASP, and over there we have another one of those signs that says maintenance not accessible whilst engine is running. I'll get closer to that if I can. And then let's just go to the other side and we'll see that it is a mirror of the first side in every respect. Now if we stand over here and pretty much right on the edge of the panel before it starts to slope down, and we would have a good chance of falling all the way down there and breaking our legs, we can actually see the hard points, which in this case, would you believe it, are covered. And we can also see the reverse thrusters and the decal now on the side of the ship. Now over here we can see the hatch or the hole going down to the second level, and it is quite some distance down. I'd say a good probably 7 to 8 feet in terms of the drop, and if you fell down there you would certainly hurt yourself. So OH&S is not strong in this ship because ordinarily you would have some sort of railing around these, but I guess you don't really care in space, although with 0G it's probably even more dangerous. So to climb down here you would obviously come to the edge of the ladder and then hoik yourself down and climb down all the way down there. And the entry is probably a good sort of 3 feet by 3 feet wide, or a meter by a meter in terms of the hole itself. Now unfortunately the interior of this thing is as huge as it is plain, and we just have repeats of pretty much the same panel. Careful not to fall down the hole. Again, well, that one's actually reasonably well aligned, and again a human-sized grab handle over here next to the rear door, which is recessed by a good sort of foot backwards. Same detailing and same low-res information as in the co-pilot seat. Over here, again, repeated the same panels. Here, again, repeated the same panels. In fact, the same entire console. You can see that CRT sort of style screen again. And down here, we just have another copy of the fire extinguisher. So really not much effort put into the Lakon ships, but it is, I guess, supposed to be a purely functional exploration vessel. And I guess it's time to step through this door and see what we can find on the other side. So here you actually have a good view of the two medium-sized hardpoints there, floating obviously in air, but you can see how far they come out and the rails that they come out on which are sort of pretty hefty, thicker, certainly double the thickness of a train rail each, and then comes out through that hatch. And then you have the relationship between that hardpoint there and one of the small hardpoints there. There goes a crate. I'll definitely be doing a video on the crate very shortly. I know it's a often request and very fascinating ship because of the amount of interior detail as well. So if you stick your head around here, you can also see there's a bit of a square to the deck where the commander actually sits. So even though it's cut in, you can see here in the wall, it's cut in a nice sort of shape. It is actually a square that just heads around the side here and out the front. And here is a good close-up view of the exterior showing the hardpoint hatch, which is colossal. It's the size, I would say, of a queen bed in terms of width, and 1.5 times the length of a queen bed, heading up on a good sort of 45-degree angle. So really severe angle and a huge hardpoint cover. And then if we go inside from there, you can see where the rails come in again and where the hardpoint would stop. So notwithstanding that the ASP Explorer is gigantic, but you can also see the size of the landing gear here, which are really long. And I'll give you a better view of that probably from the ground in a second. The cargo / SRV / everything else bay sitting over there in the center. That gives you an idea where the bottom of the ship is, which is like a good story and a half from where I am. And in terms of the upper sections that I can see through there, the hatches and things, they're probably another good 2 stories above me. So this thing is like a flying 4 to 5 story building, which is really deceptive, I think, because you look at it from the outside and you think, oh yeah, it's small, but then you have to consider how large this canopy is and how far up it goes, which is probably to the 2nd story quite easily, and then consider how far away everything is. Those engines at the back are probably as high as 2 humans standing on each other's shoulders, so that gives you an idea of how far away those engines are relative to how big they are. Alright, so there's only one more thing for it, which is to do an auto launch. So let's watch the landing gear as they come up.
Off. Clear for departure.
And then clearly they disappear, as with all the other bits of landing gear that you see in the game. So let's fire up the engines, give it a bit of a boost, which is blinding, but you can't really see anything else apart from a ton of light. And there you can see the engines firing away as we go up from the surface. And you can also see the lateral thrusters firing and the rotational thrusters, or as in how the thrusters fire when the rotation occurs. And if we head back to the front, you can also see the reverse thrusters and what they look like when they're firing out the side here, which is actually quite the jet. Alright, so as we're floating up here above the planet, we'll give you a look at the fact that you can actually turn on the ship lights and see them, which is kind of cool, because they sort of sit down sit down under there. They're not actually particularly all that well textured, but they sort of appear from just over there and just in front of where the ship actually ends. So the other main thing we can see from here is the hardpoint covers. So let's deploy the hardpoints from this vantage point and watch them come out. You can see, unfortunately, you can see through the ship as the hardpoint deploys and retracts. There's a big hole down the back. You can see the back of the ship through that. And if we return to where we were downstairs for the secondary commander's chair and we watch the small ones come out, you can see we can't actually see through that section as they go in and out, but let's stick my head in. You can see that it has deployed down, and if we retract it, it comes up. And we can actually see the missile launcher there for a split second as it deploys before it disappears again as it retracts, which is quite interesting. On the other side, same deal with the mining missiles. So they do retract and then disappear, which is interesting. And here's the low mounted one deploying and the cover going backwards, which is again very interesting. This thing sits very close to the interior of the lower commander chair. And I just realized here there is a box, which is a bit strange. What the heck is the purpose of that? Oh, that's the interior wall from the other side, which obviously would have a block out. Yes, so that's got a texture to it. You can actually stick your head through there and see another section of the interior coming out this way, a very small section before you get to the hard points. Okay, cool. And from this point you can see the medium hard point and how it retracts, the fact that it moves backwards, which is sort of quite unique for these ships, that often they come out rather than out from the rear. And again, you can see how hefty that panel is, which is a good sort of 8 inches in depth. If we roll that out again, there we are. And again, the medium-sized hardpoint is huge. It's probably 7 foot long, or maybe 8 feet long in total from tip to end. And from the base to the top of it is probably to about my midriff. So it is a huge piece of kit. And again, you can see I could probably dance a jig on the floor here before I even get to the commander, who I'm now touching on the shoulder. So this area is really, really gigantic. And it's not something that really comes across very easily when you're just sitting in that chair looking about in 2D mode. So as we head back into Neumann Camp, or Neumann Camp, or however you want to pronounce it, my German's not that excellent, this might be a good time to address motion sickness. Now, for me, I don't actually get motion sick, but I have been practicing by playing VR games quite a lot. And there are some things that make me ill, but pretty much it's car racing games where you're going screaming around a corner and the car rear slides out, but of course you're sitting on the chair as you are. And generally, when I'm playing those games, I'll seat myself perfectly still. With Elite Dangerous, or at least the ships in Elite Dangerous, you don't really get that sense of motion sickness. Even as I'm flying, there is a small sense of giddiness as the ship drops dramatically quickly onto the landing pad. But I guess because the ship is so vast and there are so many points of reference, you don't actually feel that motion sickness all that much, although there are times where you might sort of feel a bit off balance. But that's really only when you're standing. When you're sitting, it's a perfectly smooth and clear experience. And one other thing I wanted to mention is, while I'm here, the sprite nature of the lights, unfortunately, which, as you can see, even the lens flare is very spritey. And it's one of the reasons why I don't want to and won't be showing you any black holes in these walkthroughs, because they are entirely nauseating. So that is one thing that does make me motion sick, because effectively what happens is there are 2 different sprites that are projected, one in each eye, and each of which moves like this whilst distorting the stars independently and crossing over itself. So it is extraordinarily nauseating to look into a black hole in this game, and I do hope that they fix that. Alright Commanders, that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching as always. Because this is an Explorer ship, the very next obvious thing to do is to stick an SRV on the ground out of it and drive it around, and of course give you the tour of the SRV, as it is the only land vehicle that we have. Come on, Frontier, please. So once again, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. YouTube needs you to get 1,000 subscribers to kind of exist. So that's what I'm trying to aim towards, so please subscribe. And on that, if you're a member of any ED forums or any place where you talk about VR or ED or both, can you please do me a favor and grab one of the URLs from one of these videos, cut and paste it, chuck it into the forums and advertise the channel. That would really help me out. Alright, that'll do for me. I'm going to go do the SRV video, which will be up in a couple of days, so please stay tuned for that one. Otherwise, thank you so much for your support, for your comments, for liking and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Fly safe, Commanders.